Welcome to the Coach's Table podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What's going on, everybody? Wow, this episode today I think is going to blow your mind. I think it's going to be one that you're going to have to go back and listen to several times. And because I'm very excited about it. We've been talking for probably 20, 30 minutes before this has even started recording, and I've just been asking questions after questions after questions. So you guys are going to get a lot of information in today's episode. But before I introduce the guests and before we get started, do a huge favor and share the show. Okay, if you get one of three things, if you get entertained, if you get educated, if you get encouraged, if you get value in any sort of capacity through this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening via Spotify, Apple, or any other platform, if you get one thing from this, do us a huge favor, share the show. That's the only way the show grows. It's all based off value exchange. It's all based upon if we do good, do us a huge favor, share the show. That's just not one time. That's every single episode. Share it with a friend, somebody that you think could benefit it from this as well. And so today's episode that we're going to take a deep dive in and ask a lot of questions and stuff. I'm very excited about it. It's a system called Square One. And the individual that I have with me works there and is going to give us kind of a master class with it. Here's the thing, though. In order to truly learn what they're talking about, you should go and learn from them, right? So just taking this one episode or this podcast or whatever, go and learn from them. I'm a huge believer in supporting people, purchasing their products, learning directly from them. And that's the best thing that you can do face-to-face, learn from them, ask questions as well. And so don't just take this and say, I know everything, because you don't, because I don't, and because they probably don't either, but go and learn from them directly. So what you hear here today is probably just going to be, you're going to have 1,000 more questions afterwards, because as we communicate more, I'm having more and more questions. So what I'm telling you is just go learn from them as well. Okay. Help support them, help support what they do, but go and learn from them. So without further ado, I have Mr. Ryan Thompson. What's going on?
Hey, man. How you doing?
Great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Excited. Very excited to be here and talk to you about like Square One and how we apply it and how we kind of, learn from the get-go of what our nervous system is capable of.
Yes. So for any of you that don't know what Square One is, and Ryan, maybe they know, maybe they don't know, could you give us an overview? You said it just a little bit ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. But could you give people an overview if they've never heard of it, they don't know what it is? What is it? What's the system? Kind of talk about that.
All right. So Square One is pretty much, so our nervous system is always either accepting some type of stimulus or denying it, right? We're very binary. So what Square One does is it will, when a stimulus is introduced to the nervous system, we have a way using a neurological muscle test that will let us read how the nervous system responds. So as an example, if you were taking a deep mouth breath, we would check that and see how the body responds. If it responds negatively, you will fail that test by not being able to hold the position that we ask of you. And then we will do our intervention to reset the nervous system, either through the ocular system, the vestibular system, the vagus nerve. Like there are different ways that we can intervene. Mm-hmm. And over time, like you asked before, is like, how do we know if these effects stick, right? How do we know what we're doing is making an impact? Mm-hmm. So by introducing that same stress of, let's say, again, mouth breathing, we do that and we retest that muscle test and it passes, it stays strong within the position we ask of you. We know that your brain recognizes that stress as this is safe. We don't have a problem here. And now we can add in maybe something that's a little bit tougher, like breathe twice through your mouth, right? And start building resilience of your nervous system. So when we can get the brain to perceive more stimulus as safe instead of a threat, we start to see some really cool outcomes happen very fast.
So for those of you that don't know, we're talking about the nervous system in depth. As sports performance professionals, strength and conditioning professionals, we talk a lot about the nervous system in regards of recovery. We don't necessarily at times dive deep into the nervous system. We know it's broken into the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and we've classified exercises and their amount of motor units that are activated based upon like a clean, a vertical jump, a trap bar deadlift, a tricep extension. And we've identified through research on how much of those motor units are affected and activated, which then play into, how much the nervous system needs to recover, right? And then we've created systems based upon that to then say it's a high-low system, and so we're activating more motor units, and that's going to stress you more, which means you need more recovery. And what you guys are saying is we are now having a system that can test the nervous system, that we can provide progressive overload to the nervous system, and we have a way to confirm that the nervous system and the neurological aspect of it has either accepted or denied the threat, and that threat could be a multitude of things, right, to allow us to then provide more stress to the nervous system, right?
Yeah. We want to make sure that stimulus that's coming in goes one of two ways, right? It's either going to be good or bad. So
Right.
the more that we take that bad recognition out of a stress, the more good. And
Yes.
it allows us to become more resilient and be able to do more things and make these really nice changes within how our body responds, right? So like
Right.
just to like go into like a little dive, right?
Yeah.
So like we know that pain is a neurological outcome that happens from the brain, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that and like loss of range of motion, like all these tightnesses. So if we give the brain less reason to express that way, what reason are they there in the first place? They start to dissipate.
Right. Right. Okay. So, what if somebody has an injury, right? So, what if they have a joint injury, a muscle, tendon injury? Some people can be neurologically compromised, but let's just use a joint or a muscle or a tendon injury from that standpoint. Is that stuff that you guys can intervene with? Is that something that is like I don't know yet, or what does that look like from your guys' standpoint?
As long as there's like nothing like structurally wrong with it, like
Mm-hmm.
that's I'd like to stay on the safe side with that. Like if
Sure.
someone comes in and they're like, "Yo, my knee is just not okay right now," like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, so like we'll proceed with caution.
Sure.
We'll run them through square one, right? If they're like brand new, we'll run them through the basics, right? The basics are so key. So we'll use the triggers that we have set up, and I'll just run through maybe like 40,
Sure.
50 triggers.
Yeah.
And I keep in mind that, maybe they're expressing pain or there's no range of motion or like
Mm-hmm.
they can't squat.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see something like that, I'll ask them, hey, like, do you mind if I take a picture or we record this? Because if they're saying that there's like this joint issue, they think there might be a tear or something along those lines, and we run through like 50 triggers and they get up and they're walking smooth, they're squatting, they're out of pain, it was like, okay, well, let's just keep in mind, right? Like, we don't know, but there's most likely not a tear there, but you should still go get it checked out to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to walk, run, and all that pain is dissipated, or a majority of it, it's like, I think we're onto something, right? It could just be your brain being like, look, whatever that threat was that we cleared out, like that puts you in such a compromising position to like immobilize. Because that's what, safety, right? The brain is going to stop us from doing particular movements
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, that's not safe. I'm going this way.
Yeah. Yeah. The central governor theory is essentially what the brain is doing there, saying, hey, we're only going to this threshold. And until then, I'm either going to inflict a lot of pain upon you to make you stop, right? But the central governing theory is
Exactly.
essentially the theory that the brain stops anything that's going to potentially hurt us even more, right?
Right.
Okay, so I know you kind of shared with me, but can you share again, please, how you guys got started and kind of the story from that aspect that you kind of shared with me because I find that very fascinating.
Yeah. So I think it was like around 2008. Don't quote me on that. So we talked to Sean eventually.
Yeah.
He'll readdress. So in a nutshell, Sean was working as a personal trainer, and he was doing MAT, which was doing great stuff. And he had this one client come in who was very hunched over, and Sean refers to him as he was kind of like, if you put him on his belly, it was like a turtle on his back. So Sean works with him, and he ends up inadvertently helping this guy 5 years later. And the guy calls him up, and he's like, "Dude, what did you do?" And he had to convince Sean of the massive improvements that he did for him. Like, he got him completely out of pain. The guy was taller, played the best game of golf in his life. And he's like, "No, seriously, man." He's like, "What'd you do?" So it was like that. Sean calls it the impetus moment of when what he did was opposite of everything that he learned up to that point. And then he had to sit down and figure out, like, hey, man, like, what do I really know about the human body? And what tools or skills do I have that will help me assess this? Because I don't want to give away the whole story. Like,
Right.
but but yeah, like, so he sat down and kind of was like, dude, all right. So, and he started discovering and figuring out what he was looking at from a neurological standpoint. And when he started just testing it and researching it and trying with people, he was getting these like killer results. And then from that point, it just kept evolving. And I came in much later, where I got involved through a buddy of mine that I was working at a gym down at State College, and
Mm-hmm.
my buddy Corey was going to leave to go work one on one with Sean in Chicago. So like I was the guinea pig, right? Like, let's
Sure.
just try things as he's learning and getting ready to go out and work with Sean. And it didn't make sense to me until I got hurt. So I was squatting one
Mm.
day, completely like blew out my low back, my hip. Like I couldn't rotate, I couldn't take deep breaths. So the gym that I worked at had a really great reputation for getting people like back to normal, right? So I'm like, all right, dude, I'm in good hands. I'm set. And all like the exercise they gave me, like nothing fixed my problem. I couldn't work my lower body for like 6 months. So
Oh,
when that,
wow.
yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So when none of that happened, all like the myofascial release, all like the rolling, all this massage, I went to a chiropractor, I went to a specialist, and the issue was like we talked about before. It's like does the intervention stick? And none of
Right.
these interventions made an impact to the point where I was like, hey, I can move without, I was moving like an old man. I was like 24 at the time. And then Corey had come back from Chicago, just like visiting everyone, stopped by the gym. And I was like, dude, I said, if you had like 10, 20 minutes, like, please just, I'm desperate. He works for me for like 20 minutes, and I'm like completely out of pain. I was like, holy cow, dude. At that point, I was like, it doesn't matter what it costs, what it takes, dude. I'm in 100%. And
Yeah.
I took the course that December, and that was back in like 2018, I think it was 2017. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been nothing but a lot of learning and success. And Sean is an incredible mentor and buddy of mine. We've had a nice relationship built over the last couple of years, and I'm blessed that he uh, will bring me along to help teach, and how much we collaborate with really trying to get Square One moving. So,
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And that's really interesting because there's so many people that are in constant debilitating pain, that they
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's no hope, that they feel like there's no fix to whatever they're potentially struggling through, or injuries. And I'm not saying that this is the answer, right? But what I'm saying is like try different things, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them, say like I go to a chiropractor, now I go 3 days a week, and if I stop going, I'm not going to feel good. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
no shade on chiropractors, but they just feel stuck, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like the one thing that I've noticed through learning through Square One and going through and getting worked on. It's just like that you're not stuck with what you got.
Mm.
Like it's just I see people that have come in and they're like, man, I've had years of pain. I've had chronic pain. I always have these acute pains. So it's like, all right, well, like just come see me and I'll do what I do and we'll see if there's a change. And like over 95% of the time, dude, it's like, wow, I feel amazing. And we'll recheck with them. Like, all right, like you can come back as needed. Come back like once a month for a tune-up. This isn't something where it's like you're gonna have to see me 3 times a week for the next like 8 months, and then you're set for life. Like that's not
Right.
like, dude, I don't
Right.
believe in that. Like
Right.
we're constantly taking in inputs all the time that have different effects on us, and having the ability for a nervous system to not see those as threats and perceive more things as safe has just had so much of a bigger impact on clients and athletes' lives where they don't have to do all this homework all the time, right? What's we talked about before, like the one
Yeah.
plus one. Once the
Yeah.
brain knows, it's like, all right, move on. What's next? Got it.
Right. So when you guys talk about perceiving threats, right? And this is going to probably go into some eye training and stuff. What are you particularly like looking for? How do we know if it's a threat? How do we potentially correct it? I know we kind of talked a little bit about like what you guys do with like a pencil convergence of the eyes. Like, kind of talk a little bit about that. I'm so very interested in it.
So, like, when we're looking at perceived threat, like it's anything could be a potential trigger, right? So
Mhm.
we focus on the basic needs of humans, right? Which is our standing upright, squatting, and walking and breathing.
Sure.
So like that's where we start. Like getting into the eyes, like they're great. Like I like to use this with my athletes because like we have to use our eyes, right? But it's not because this is something that I want to make sure I say clear. It's not the input that makes the big output. It's going through square one and making sure that we're converting that specific stimulus from threat to safe. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
we had gone into, me and Sean had done a workshop, and I had used, like we were all messing around with like the new students, and I used convergence, divergence with one of the students, and she was doing pistol squats and drops like dude, it must have been like a foot, right? She dropped, made a significant change, and people were like, "Whoa, like what are we doing with that trigger?" And I was like, "Dude, it's like no, like you guys are missing the point. Like we stopped it and we brought everyone over, and we explained to them that it's the trigger is great, but we're using that as a tool to open the nervous system and then intervene the way that we taught you, right?" So
Okay.
like yes, and also we talked about like when we do different stimuluses, we'll see some change,
Yep.
but what locks that in is what we're doing with square one. Like we could have got her to drop that squat like a foot in a bunch of different ways. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Sure.
But just for her, like that stimulus, whatever she needed, maybe she had some funky eye stuff going on, like most of us do. Maybe that just
Yeah.
opened up access. But like we could
Right.
have done that with the same other triggers of just basics.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's it does. And so, looking at it and thinking about it and starting to be like, okay, well, the perception of threats, the aspect of the nervous system uh, potentially perceiving it as a threat, the eyes to the brain, right? Because what's funny, I think most people, and correct me if I'm wrong, the eyes connect or control to like 70% of the brain, right? And it's
They
like a
have
huge,
a lot of reach, yes.
right. And it's like, whether it's, perceptual, right? Or my peripherals, excuse me. And, or it's obviously direct on, but it's like the eyes control I don't want to say control, but impact, influence a very large component of the brain. And we hardly talk about them, right? Like, first of all, I couldn't tell you the last time I got my eyes checked, right? Like, and we
Mm-hmm.
checked to see, like, do you have 20/20 vision? Do you have 20/15? Okay, you wear glasses. But outside of that, nobody ever really does anything with. I have great eye vision, but it's like nobody ever really does anything with them. Nobody ever really talks about them. But it's like if they have such a large influence upon the brain, or connect to, or um, provide so much input to the brain, like why isn't that talked about more, if that makes sense?
I think people find it just really unconventional, right? It's like, why would you think if I want to put weight on my squat or my bench press, why am I doing like saccades before, right? Because you're warming up your brain, right? And we can see or we can get those sensory systems buzzing, right? That's what we like
Mm-hmm.
to say. It's like we want to get everything working because like if you walk in a room and you don't turn the lights on, you're probably going to kick something, right? So I want to turn on my sensory system first so I can walk through and like avoid threat, right? Avoid these
Sure.
different things that'll pop out at me.
Yeah.
So, but I also think like when we go through square one, like this is where we don't like to assume anything that we're doing is having a positive impact. So like even though if I'm doing these saccades or if I'm like shaking my head back and forth for vestibular stim, like yeah, I
Yeah.
might be able to go from touching my toes to like palms on the floor, but I would check it because I don't want to assume just because there's an improvement there that the nervous system still perceives as threat. And like we were talking about before, is like if you can make an improvement like that and then make that sense of threat convert to safe, there's probably more potential there for you to go further or express strength more.
Hmm.
But that's just, you know what I mean? That's one thing that I think about often is, right, there are all these people out here doing inputs and making great things happen. And, more power to them. I have no problem with that. I think that's awesome. But almost nobody checks to see how the nervous system responds to it.
Sure. And so, can you guys kind of? I know you kind of showed me, and I went through it a little bit, but can you kind of discuss like your system of checking? And if not, then that's fine because they probably need to take it with you or take the course with you guys. But um, can you kind of discuss that? Is that something that they need to go through the course with?
Like, what do you mean, like my system? What do you mean
Like
by
the
that?
system that you guys are checking it to see if the nervous system clears it or not. Kind of what we were talking about a little bit ago, or no.
I'm going to leave that up to the
Okay,
course.
sure,
It's simple. Like Sean has it laid out in a,
sure,
you know what I mean, a way in which it's very simple to follow
sure.
and make our interventions correctly. But yeah, if you want to like dive in deep, like come to a workshop and come meet us and we'll
Yeah,
show you
yeah.
some how
Okay,
to work the system and make it happen.
awesome. Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure, but okay. So when we're, it's just okay. So a lot of the people that listen to this are strength and conditioning professionals, sports performance professionals, people that impact athletes, people that work with athletes. The reason why kind of this is important because one of the largest constraints that we have in sporting actions is a time constraint, right?
Mhm.
And that time constraint, we then, it's like 250 milliseconds or less. Um, and we need to be able to identify, right, orient, like the OODA loop process, right? So we need to be able to like orient and then decide and then make an action, right? And so when looking at this, what you were kind of sharing with me a little bit beforehand too was like you would work with athletes prior to competition, and some of them had a lot of success with that. And it's not
Mhm.
that the OODA loop process, but you're talking about like resetting them and things of that nature. And so how does that kind of help us with the OODA loop process in regards of perceiving threats? Like, let's say I'm a football player, I'm a two guy, so I'm a slot wide receiver, and I'm going to run a quick slant, whatever the case may be. Does this help my body perceive the threat of that middle or outside backer coming to knock my head off, and can help like protect from that standpoint a little bit because I'm neurologically more in tune or have the ability to handle more
Yeah,
stress? Is that accurate?
yeah, that makes sense. So like when we start to organize the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and we get our body is able to express more, right? So we're not like holding back or restricting. So
Sure.
our brain has all these resources to help us, input, the OODA loop like you're talking about, right?
Yep.
So I can process that information faster if my sensory systems are prepared to take it in at an
Right.
accepted rate.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, and I'll give you an example. If you're that slot receiver and you're coming out and you need to hit that cut real fast, like we may use that as a potential trigger, right? Well, after we get through the basics, right? If we want to go into the sports where we want to get specific, I would mess with you with that specific pattern, and maybe we'll do some kind of metric like put a timer on it, right? What are my electric timers telling me it takes you to get from point A, cut point B? And if we can cut like half a second off that, you know what I mean, in like 5 to 15 minutes, I'd say that checks all the boxes in terms of my athletes moving faster. I am still within my time restraint of what we have, and I didn't take away from practice, right? Skill work.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I'm very interested. Okay, so thinking about this, knowing that maximal sprinting is the highest stimulus that I can place upon the nervous system due to time constraints and the amount of force in which is applied. Have you guys seen or have you guys worked with, and I know we kind of talked about a couple other guys before this, working with this, but if sprinting max velocity sprinting is the highest stress that I can place upon the nervous system because it's literally the fastest that I've ever ran, right? And in the shortest amount of time, which means I'm applying the most amount of force. How do you guys kind of impact that and what potential positive impacts could come from that? Does it mean running a faster time, more neurologically efficient, which would be then having less quote unquote energy leaks, right?
Yeah.
Well, what does that look like for you guys from that standpoint? I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So like I wouldn't even go that complex, right?
Okay.
Like I think super basic, right? So
Sure.
going back to square one, right? Gait plays a really big role in square one. So
Yeah.
what's sprinting?
It's
It's
literally the gate
fast gait,
aspect of it. Yeah, as fast as
right?
possible. Yeah.
So all we're doing is like not even through like the process of triggering, right? Like if you going through like square one, we're looking at gait. So we have the ability to figure out exactly which joint in which plane of motion is intolerant to ground forces, right? So like if we clean that up, we're cleaning up gait. So the more efficient we become at regular gait, now those energy leaks, right? They're not leaking. So
Right.
now, so when your gait pattern gets great, most likely squat pattern is going to get great.
Right.
Or not squat, I'm sorry, sprint. You know what I mean.
Sprint pattern.
But
Yep.
but even just by clearing up the efficiencies or the inefficiencies in gait, we've seen squat improve. You know what I mean? We've seen like body positions move. There's been a guy
Sure.
that my buddy was working on, and his rib cage was like popping up. Him just laying flat. He was like orientated to the side. I think he worked on it for like a half hour or something. Took another picture. Orientation of his rib cage went back to normal, or whatever his normal is, right?
Sure.
So like we've seen these massive changes just by cleaning up perceptions of threat in gait.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because when you look at gait and you look at contact with the ground and you look at how each individual is so vastly different when we walk, um, and it can tell you a lot about an individual. It really can. Like if you literally just start watching people walk. Like I love to people watch, and I know that's a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing, and people love to do it too. But instead of just people watch from behaviors, like people watching gait pattern. And it was funny because I think there's a research article or something, but just from my personal experience from like my time in the military and everything as well, watching people walk, like when we use like night vision goggles or thermals or things like that, you can identify who that individual is literally based upon their
Mm-hmm.
gait alone. And I'm watching somebody, I'm literally watching them through the thermals, right? I'm like, oh yeah, that's Sergeant so and so. I'm like, how do you know? It's like that's the way he walks. Like literally, it's like I don't even connect. I'm like, that's just the way he walks. That's who he is. That's that person, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's so funny because you can have like the lights off, and if you just see somebody moving, or like you just look at them from the backside, you might not know who they are or what, but it's just like, oh, I think that's so and so literally based upon the way that they walk, and it's so
Mm-hmm.
intriguing from the gait perspective because you can just identify like who it is and you're so confident in your answer too, of like, yeah, that's so
Mm-hmm.
and so. Like the gait is so interesting.
Well, gait, like we are, if you think about it, like that's how we are wired to move is gait, and the fact that you can identify a person through their gait, you know, I mean, it's incredible. So if you think about that, right? Anytime that I'm people watching or like
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching people walk or anything, I'm thinking right now that is the best that their brain can put together walking for them. Like that's it right now, right? So that's like the kind of lens that I'm looking at, you know, movement now is, and then also I'm thinking, man, if I had like 5 to 10 minutes with them, I'd put my house on it that we can change the way that they're walking, whether it's posture wise, whether it's smoothness of contractions when they walk and transitions. Like that's in a nutshell, right? That's what we're doing. We're going to reorganize the way that their brain is going to write up a blueprint on how gait happens. So it's interesting because like I've seen people like my day job. I mean, I see people all the time, and I'll see people come in and they got one shoulder hiked up and they're doing like a limp like this. And my first thought is like, man, that's the best that their brain can do. There is so much threat going on that has changed their physiology based on the neural inputs through the sensory systems. So we change that, right? We change these perception of threats. All of a sudden, like, boom, shoulder comes down or less of a limp, and you start to see it go away.
Yeah.
And then, like, the cool thing is over time, right? So, Square One doesn't have homework, right? So, the more that we integrate these better, more, I don't even want to say, more efficient patterns of how to move, they have a better chance to self organize themselves. So, they will continue to get better as time goes on because all they're doing is going through life, right? They're reinforcing their gait by everyday life. We get their breathing patterns, accepted by the nervous system. We get gait accepted by the nervous system. And all of a sudden you see them like a week later and you're like, holy cow. And they're like, hey, I feel really good. Or, hey, I don't know if you saw me, but I got out of the car completely different from the first day you saw me. I mean, or they'll tell you like, hey, I slept great last night because they're not withholding all these resources because their body thinks that they're literally about to die, right? Like such a perception of protection and threat. And it's like, nah, man, everything's cool. Like we're heading towards the land of milk and honey right now. Like you're good.
Yeah. Well, I even noticed it with myself. And what I mean by that is like when I get stressed, when I get stressed, like my shoulders like are like my traps are like more contracted, if that makes sense. Like, and I'm like more just like tense. And then when I'm walking sometimes and I literally just breathe and I go, and I'm like, oh, and like I physically notice like my shoulders drop and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was tense. Like, why was I so tense? Like, and it's just like a normal walking pattern. I'm just like, why am I so tense? Like, but I noticed it rather often on myself, probably because I induce a lot of stress, but I noticed it on myself and I'm just like, when I breathe, that's just like I physically notice and feel like my shoulders are like I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm good now. Like it's I don't know, it's weird. I'm not gonna lie.
I think it comes down to like we hold all this tension. I think that the subconscious brain runs the show. That's my opinion.
Oh yeah,
Like, it doesn't matter. So like especially with people who have introduced to trauma, we've all been introduced to trauma in our life, and it's like sometimes there's like that tipping point where people are constantly in a state of sympathetic, right? They're just always ready to get out, right?
Yeah.
You see guys who maybe sit in restaurants and they're always like, I got to have my back to the wall and I got to be able to see everyone and I need to know where my exits are right now just in case. That's you?
That's
like,
me. Yep.
Yeah, man. And
That's
it's just
me.
like, yeah, because you're just like, you know what I mean? Based on, whatever, or you just always need to know that at any point in time, you're ready to go. Like breaking necks and cashing checks. I need to make sure we're safe, right? So,
yeah.
But like we want to take that nervous system and just be like, hey, man, like you don't have to be on right now. We can be relaxed, but we still have the ability to snap into action right away. But you don't have to live in that state of like, it's go time right now. You know what I mean? Like grandma just take out of here. So
I think for me, it's a little different only because I've had 12 years of military training. And so like, it's been so ingrained in me to like, just think that way, if that makes sense. Like, okay, like, hey, have everything covered. Like, like where are the exits and like, I don't like my back towards things I can't see, like it's just, whether it's a threat, whether I'm just constantly thinking of threats or whether it's just constantly thinking of protection, I don't know. But it's just like, that's always the thought process, it's like, it's the first one. It's like, okay, like, where's everything at? Make sure I see everything. Okay, cool. Not because I'm doing anything shady or anything from that standpoint. It's just the training process that I've been through,
Well, I think that there's also a difference of like for that, like I also do the same thing. I like to have my back to the wall, and I also like to look.
Yeah. I
But
think it's a man thing to do, you know?
I definitely think it's a mad thing to do.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's a difference between being prepared for something to happen and also being in a constant state of threat. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because like I
Okay.
was just reading, I'm almost done with this book. It's called The Body That Keeps the Score, and it goes through people who've been through some like pretty horrific traumas
Sure.
where they've gotten to the point where they lose like somatosensory, like they can't
Mm,
feel their limbs, like total numbness, or um, they're just always in this constant state of they don't understand where they are or how to like harbor their feelings. So like I think that by going through these ways to organize your nervous system through different techniques or whatnot, or going through square one, like we have the opportunity to get them out of that state of super panic. But if they want to keep some of those habits that keep them prepared, like dude, that's all you, man. That's
right.
you go do that. But
Right.
just know that that subconscious doesn't have to be frantic all the time. I think that that plays a big role that I think not a lot of people are paying attention to.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I think to that to I mean, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it, right? There's so many factors. It's so multifactorial that
Mhm.
has people on edge, whether it's cell phones, whether it's social media or whatever the case may be. Like there's a lot of things that we're constantly consuming that
Mhm.
get us in a heightened arousal level continuously, right? Um,
Yeah,
and, and and so monitoring kind of that too, and understanding situations and context and things. But yeah, to your point, like it doesn't always need to be like ready, like
yeah,
um,
like on the go, like 24/7. Like
yeah,
yeah, like we heal like when we're in that parasympathetic state, right? That lets us heal and like move on um and like I don't know, I just that's what I personally think. But like and that falls into like the world of strength training. So
yeah,
I think of this. So like what if you had a kid who was going to max and just got stuck under the bar, right? He may always have this kind of like perception of threat of like, you know what, I don't want a back squat today, or I don't want to do whatever variation of squat we're doing today. It's
sure,
like, man, like, and then that could roll into like, come on, dude, like, were you scared or something like that? Like, there are different ways to get out of it, but what if we were to remove that perception of threat, from a cognitive standpoint or just a physical, and then we start to build that confidence back up through that neurological reinforcement. And that could happen on the field, right? Like, what happens if you were pitching and it was all on you to strike this dude out and you gave up a winning run, right? Like,
right,
these kind of things, I think, play a giant mental role with like athletes. So, like, man, we've even seen like simple things of like a pitcher standing on the mound and like looking to check the runner at second. You know what I mean? Like, and then boom,
hmm
check. And we run over scenarios like that. Like, try pitching with your head up, eyes down. Like, even simple things, thought process. Like, that's the one
yeah,
thing I really love about Square One is like we have the ability to check almost anything, but like don't get caught up in that. But like if you have pitchers that need to be in different scenarios or something like that, you want to just like, hey, let's just make sure that your nervous system isn't shutting down when you're doing this. Yeah, man, like that's cool. But it will always come back to work your basics first before you go out and explore.
yeah. Yeah, always. And to the point there of what you said on how it's always such a mental performance aspect too. And it truly is just a anecdotal stuff, like when I was younger and I was doing one arm back squats when I was playing college ball and stuff, it's like there was a certain threshold of weight for me that I was just like, anytime I got close to that, I was like, am I going to be able to do that? Like, but what
Mm-hmm.
it is like, what if you didn't know how much weight was on the bar? How would you approach it then? You know, would you approach
Mm-hmm.
like, what if it was 135, right? Like, what if it was 465? What if it was 500? Like, because I was able to see the weight that was on there, my eyes were telling my brain, like, I don't know about that, Um,
Right.
and it happens. And same thing, like when I was playing ball, there would be times where I was going through like my warm up, and you do it for like a confidence thing. It's like there was times where like I was just in my head of like I'm gonna have a bad game this game, and then it was like I'm misreading cues, and I literally would have like the worst games on those days. And it was just like, maybe I was just all in my own head. I don't know. But I remember thinking, it was like, it's particular against this one team too, that I'd always be like, I'm going to have a bad game this game. And then I would have a shit game. And I'd miss tackles and I would misread my cues. And maybe that's just mental performance. But like those two things when you were talking popped in my head. I'm like, yep, when X weight gets on the bar or did. And then when I'd play these teams, I'd have bad games. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah,
I'm sure every athlete goes through it.
think I agreed. I did the same thing, right? Anytime that I would put X amount of weight on a bar doing a certain exercise, it was just like starting to talk myself out of it. I
Yeah.
mean, but I think that like, because like, self talk is important. Like we can,
Mm.
kid any kind of negative thought that, that I've played around with different experiments I do, is like these negative thoughts will come in and often they'll show up as a negative, read. So like, all right, I'll share an example. I worked with this one girl. She came in because she was getting like these really bad migraines and headaches. So, and she was always like super tense. So I was like, all right, so like, you don't have to tell me. I was like, just think about something that stresses you out. Like, what are you stressed about? And I would test and it would fail. And so we just go through like different thoughts that she would have. And by the end, I was like, all right, well, think about something. And she was thinking about something that stressed her out and it would pass. Even if it was like a new thought, right? So she had a better,
Mm.
more internal resources to self-organize it to show her that, like, hey, these negative thoughts they're not going to mess with me. And I remember when she sat up, like her shoulders were relaxed. She was good. Her mom was like, you look really relaxed. Like, it's great. Like, she wasn't like tensing up in her forehead. Her headache went away. And we don't have like control over, like, I don't want to say, we don't always know what will change. We just know that we're changing something
Mm.
in terms of like the way that their body's organized, because they're going to change, length tension relationships. We're going to change different, I don't know, other things that maybe I know, maybe I don't know about. But like after you work with someone, they get up and they're like, man, I feel light. I feel like I can move better. I don't feel as tense. I feel like I don't have to, pull myself into good posture. I just feel like I'm here, right? So like when we reorganize and they get like that sensation, they're just recalibrating to what their new perception of their environment is and their internal environment. So I think that that's a massive part of square one is, being able to reduce these threats, whatever they may be, whatever these potential triggers are, and preparing the body for what it needs to do. This way that we're in a state of homeostasis more often than not. And
Yeah.
then we see these crazy outcomes change. Like I'm sure you've seen some of the stories that
Yeah.
we've been able to produce as an entire, system, where it's like you see them like, hey, we cleared out like 30 dysfunctions in like 45 minutes and now they're completely out of pain. Or we did a 15-minute session and cleared out like 20 layers and they used to be here, now they're here. Like all these crazy things. So
Yeah.
yeah, man, just it comes down to understanding how to read the nervous system when stress is applied, how to run the system, and how to check yourself to make sure that you're running it correctly.
So, how much does breathing play a role in it as well?
uh, breathing breathing plays a really big role. Yeah, so it's huge. So
Yeah.
um,
And
I
here's
know
why I
that there
asked.
was.
Well,
Go ahead.
here's why I asked, because everybody talks about breathing, how important breathing is. Obviously, it's essential. It's as essential to us living as anything, right?
Mhm.
But there's breathing methods that are out there that I think have been successful, like a 4-7-8 or something of that nature. Um, from your guys' perspective, like how critical, how important is breathing? In regards to the nervous system, whether it's getting us into a parasympathetic state or not. But what does that look like from your guys' perspective?
It's huge, man. Breathing plays a massive role. So me and Sean both read Breath by James Nestor,
Okay.
and for Sean, when he discovered um, the vestibular reset, nasal breathing plays a humongous role in that. Like it's just the way, like it has to be done in a specific way. But when you go to the workshop and when you learn this stuff, you'll see how much of an impact uh, the breathing is, and how we also use mouth breathing as a way to open the nervous system. So it's like even if you read the book and you see like they talk about nasal breathing is a more efficient way for us to get oxygen to our bodies, right? It's humidified, it's nice, clean, fresh air.
Hmm.
So when I read that book, one of the things that I took away was like mouth, that's tap water. This purified water. You got yourself some nice filtered water here. This is necessary. This is if you really need it.
Okay.
So like that's the way I look at the way that breathing plays its role, and it's made a massive impact on Square One as a whole in terms of the vestibular reset.
That's really interesting because one of the things that we start to pick up on of I'm going to say elite performers, athletes when they're tired, is you will start to see them breathing out of their, like, okay, so if an athlete is tired, you will start to see them breathing out of their mouth more than if an
Hmm.
athlete is refreshed or not as challenged, as they'll breathe out of their nose more frequently. And
Hmm.
you'll also see athletes when they're super relaxed, like a great one of this is Michael Jordan. He will always play with his tongue out, right?
Hmm.
And if we're talking about threats, right, if I play with my tongue out and I bite down, that's obviously a
Hmm.
threat. But he was so relaxed, that he would always have his tongue out when he was playing. And that's just a huge sign of like how relaxed he was, because to everybody else, that's a massive threat, right? Um,
Well, I'll chime in quick. I think that well, first of all, I think Jordan is absolutely a superior being, right? Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
guy's worst day is
Right.
like
Anybody's like
still
once in a
way better.
lifetime performance. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where it like comes into square one too. Is like when you're dealing with someone like Jordan, right? Like
Hmm.
he was able to perform at such a high level in a state of chaos,
Yes.
right? Like not to say that his tongue out was not a threat because it probably was a threat to his nervous system based on like stuff that like we found.
Sure.
And but the fact that he can perform at this high level while still in that order of chaos, like dude, if he was squared up, like I think he would have been like even better than what he has come to now, just in terms of becoming more efficient and having that neural background behind him of acceptance, right? Because it's
Okay.
like if we can take a an average or like yeah like an average athlete, right, and they perform okay, but I can get their nervous system behind them and take them from average to like yo this kid is great. Like what'd you do this summer for training? Oh, I got squared up. Like that's cool. Like I made a post the other day where it was like make the elite legendary, make the great elite, make the good great, make the okay good, make the struggling okay, climb the ladder,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it's like everyone has this, their nervous system has X amount of capacity to receive input and to create an output efficiency or efficiently. So like if you got these superior beings like we've seen working with like D1 guys, like it's like tuning up Ferraris. That's what
Yeah.
Sean refers to
Yeah.
it as. It's like, yeah, they may have like an ache and a pain clear like one, 2 layers, and it's like, wow, dude, this is nuts. Or do like a force output where they bump up like a ridiculous amount of force output in like 3 minutes after clearing like 1 or 2 layers. And every once in a while you get someone who's like you still went up like 50 pounds in your force output. Like, dude, that's awesome.
Sure.
And that could be someone that just has a little bit more or less resilience in their nervous system yet. Like, we can build up, but I still think at this point, I still think that there's a neural ceiling, I guess, for
Okay.
some people, or like
Sure.
they may just not respond super well yet. And then you got the freaks where it's like you can clear a couple layers and their numbers and force output or pitch velocities or bow velocity or whatever the metric may be just go through the roof. And they're like, how did you do that? It's like I didn't really do anything. I all I did was organize your nervous system and let you take it from there. Like that's it. You do you. I'm just gonna make sure that what you're doing is accepted by your nervous system, and and you just keep doing your thing.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. So this will be kind of I think this will be my last question. So, how much of that is genetic related? Is it genetic related? Does that play a role? How does that kind of come into play? Do we know yet? Maybe, maybe not.
I don't know what it looks like.
Sure,
I just
sure.
yeah I don't know what that looks like because like I've had kids come in And, I have some kids, same thing. They'll respond super well. And I might have one or two people who are just like, that was, that was okay. You still made great improvement, but it's not as big of a jump as these guys.
Gotcha.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like I've had, trying to think of how many people. So I've probably had like between like 60 and 70 different clients in and out of here, like that continually come in and train. And I might have had like one or two that, it was just like, all right, man, you're doing great. I love the work. I love the effort, but you're not making the same amount of progress that these guys are doing, like majority. So it like, I don't know. It depends on
Sure.
how their nervous system reacts in terms of like the different organization or at the level that I'm working with. Right, I have some guys who are more like middle school, high school, so there
Yeah.
may be like a little cognitive disconnect on what's going on.
Yeah.
But for like 98% of the population that I work with, they seem to respond really well. Especially if you have like more of these like D1 ish, type of athletes, D1, D2 guys. They're just,
Yeah.
they adapt to things very well.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why they're at that level though too.
Right.
And they're twitchy, they're freaky, I mean, geez, yeah. And so it's just really interesting to kind of think about, wrap your head around the aspect of it because, there's a reason why they're there, and a lot of times it's because they have a superior nervous system, if I'm being honest with you, which allows them to sprint
Agree.
faster, which allows them to jump higher, which allows them to push more weight, which allows them to recover faster too. And there's so many like things that come into play, and it's so crazy. And that's why I was curious, like, is it a genetic? Like, I'm gonna make this something genetics plays a role. How much I don't know. Just like genetics plays a role in what you look like and what I look like to an extent, right?
Yeah.
I'm not just saying genetics everything, no, but to an extent, obviously. That's why my favorite saying is like, pick better parents next time. But it's really interesting. It's like, hey man, that's all you got. I'm sorry, you chose the wrong parents, but they always get a good kick out of that. But it's just really interesting and it's hard to wrap your mind around all of it. And I'm interested to learn more, to continually learn more, because I think if we can, like I said, probably at the beginning off air or whatever, if we can apply this at scale, like how much of an impact is that going to make? If we could do it with the whole team, if you could do it and just reset or test or ensure that they're, 25 minutes prior to games, 25 minutes prior to whatever, like how much does that make a difference? I don't know yet. I really don't. And that's why I was like, let's chat about it,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's been great though.
Yeah. And well, like the one thing, like even like, because a lot of times when Square One was like first introduced to like the public and all that, people didn't know how to like integrate it into a team setting. And like we're working on, setting up some courses to show that, hey man, like this is valuable in a team setting, in a weight room setting. Like we have ways to show you how to use this in larger groups instead of just like one on one.
Right.
So like I've been doing it for the last 2 years in group settings with these guys and getting them to really understand what the goal is. Right. It's like once I got them to realize like, hey, like you guys are strong. Like, are you guys over it yet?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that part became easy once their nervous system got behind them and I got better at programming and all these other aspects. But I was like, all right, so we checked off the box. You're strong, great. Now can we focus in on becoming better athletes and getting faster and learning how to apply this to these things? And once we build that trust, and they're like, oh wow, like yeah. So being able to apply it in these larger settings before games, after games, long travel days when you guys are going, like if you feel like junk, come see me. We'll tune you up, get you feeling right, and then the next day, not uncommon for you to have a great game. And if you get the whole team on that, you guys are going to be really hard to beat.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I know I have a lot more questions, but they're more detailed, and there's probably a certain level where you're like, hey. So, Ryan, where can people reach out to you at if they have more questions based upon this? Where's the best way to hit you?
On Instagram, honestly, it's at Last Resort Restoration. You guys feel free to say what's up. I love talking about this stuff. And if you guys have questions about Square One, I can help guide you guys to Sean, which is at Square One System. And come in, check it out, see what we got. Like the one thing that I really love to do is I just let my results speak on what I've been able to help clients with and athletes with. So I'm just showing you guys what I'm finding. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
out here in my garage in the middle of PA, and we're getting some pretty crazy results. And being able to help you guys get involved with Square One and learning about neurology, I highly recommend it. It's great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you for the time today. I really appreciate it. I do look forward to more conversations with you guys here in the future, and trying to understand this more and trying to wrap my head around it more and trying to be like, okay. And so I just want to say thank you for that. I really appreciate you, your time, everything, the knowledge, what you guys are doing. And like I said, I'm very interested to learn more. So, guys, if you have a lot of questions, if you learned something, reach out to Ryan, reach out to Sean. And if you got something from this episode, because I believe that there's plenty of things that you could take away from this, do us a huge favor, share this with a friend. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and then leave a comment. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, do us a huge favor and leave a review. It literally takes 10 seconds of your life. And then if you would, share this with a friend, somebody that you think could benefit from this. It's the only way the show grows. And we are growing quite rapidly, which is fantastic. And bringing guests on like Ryan and Square One System and trying to bring you guys the most amount of value, information that's cutting edge, that's continuing to move your needle forward, rather than talking about things that everybody's talked about for a long time. So but no, I mean, for real though. But so if you guys like this episode, share it. Seriously, Ryan, thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate it. And guys, we'll catch you guys next time for the next one, because there's plenty of amazing guests coming on as well. So share this with a friend and we'll catch you guys on the next one.